services, and I know there's probably a lot of that.
One thing that you really, really well about you is I taken time out of an insane film.
Bobby Harrington has led at all levels. He's led United States Marines in combat. He's led huge teams in multi-billion-dollar industries. He's led people all over the world. And on today's episode of Unbeatable, Bobby and I just get real about the challenges of leadership. Bobby talks about your greatest challenge as a leader and how he can help you lead yourself better. So hang on and strap in for my conversation with Bobby Harrington on this episode of Unbeatable. Now, before we get into the leadership discussion, let me remind you about the guys and gals from the Solomon Foundation who are helping to underwrite this episode. The Solomon Foundation is committed. They're going to help the local church grow, but they're also going to help you. And the way that they do that is by giving you an excellent return while you make an eternal impact. So why don't you go check them out? Go to thesolomonfoundation.org. Now, Bobby and I have a honest conversation where we both nerd out a little bit on leadership.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Bobby, thank you for being willing to be a guest with me on this episode of Unbeatable.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here. Much appreciated.
I guess I should start off the whole conversation by simply saying to you, Semper Fi, man.
Oh, Semper Fi. Yeah, for sure.
I love the Eagle Globe and anchor in the background. So for everybody who's listening that is not familiar with the United States Marine Corps, of course, that's your logo in the background. And that is what all Marines live up to, that always faithful motto, right?
That's right. 100%.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I'm going to nerd out during this conversation, and we're just going to have a conversation about leading people. Because I think, like you, I kind of fell into this, wasn't looking for it, fell into leadership, and then learned to love it and really, really love it along the way. But it didn't start out that way, man. So let's try to work backwards right now. You do some leading at a really high level. Can you tell folks about the way that you lead in the petroleum industry right now?
Right. So I retired 6 months ago from Chevron, and I had the privilege to work for them for almost 19 years, and worked all over the world, China, Nigeria, other places like that. And at the end of the day, we had about 150 people on our team, $34 million budget, and working between an executive team on site. Working with a technical team in Houston, and then, working with some folks in California as well. So, on any day, it was a good challenge, right? Not only to people lead, but, you're kind of always in the figure eight, as they call it. You're always in between, two or more entities. So it was definitely a good challenge.
Did you live in all of those countries that you just mentioned, or did you just do big projects there?
Yeah, no, great question. So, in Chevron and oil and gas, the way it works is a lot of times these expat assignments are a 28 and 28 rotation, meaning you're in country for 28 days and you're home for 28 days. So it's kind of like mini deployments, every 28 days, you're shipping out.
That is hard on a family, man. That's hard on anybody personally, especially when you're 13 time zones away from where you live, but hard on a family too.
Yeah, for sure. At the end of the day, a lot of folks would joke that, when we go home, we're actually interrupting the family, right?
Yeah.
Because, the first couple rotations when you leave, it's pretty traumatic, for the family. But after a while, people are resilient, especially kids, and, the wife, sort of gets used to what you're doing, and, they have their own routine. So when you come home, you kind of have the realization that, I need to integrate back into them, right?
Bobby, you are I'm impressed, man. You are a smart man. A lot of guys that I know don't learn that lesson or learn that lesson way too late. That, yeah,
Yeah.
your family's got everything taken care of while you're gone. And you don't just barge back in the door and start barking orders and telling everybody what to do, because you're almost like a guest when you go back home after being away for 28 days or for 18 months, whatever.
Amen. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not an expert, but I live in the United States, and of course, as oil prices change, so does the entire economy. Yours was the industry that people all over the world love to hate, but I don't think most of the listeners understand just how volatile and just how challenging the energy industry is in general, but especially Chevron and, the petroleum industry. So I've watched them put up record profit numbers, and then I've watched them 2 months later put up record losses, the kind of money in billions of dollars in a month or two that most people would faint when they saw those kind of losses. Yeah. Can you describe just a little bit about how difficult that industry, leading at a high level is hard no matter where you're at, but leading in a difficult industry like that is even more challenging. So
Yeah.
can you talk about some of the challenges of the petroleum industry, especially over the last 5, 6, 8 years?
Yeah, no, it is volatile because, there's over 6,000 products made from oil and gas, right? The lipstick your wife wears, the tires we drive on, so on and so forth. So, it's a commodity that's needed, and we won't be pivoting away from oil and gas
Yeah, hold on.
anytime soon.
I want to make sure people understand Elon Musk is not going to make the lipstick that your wife wears go away. No matter what, there's
Well,
still,
he might, but not tomorrow.
yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of products out there that petroleum touch. Sorry, man, go for it.
No, for certain. Yeah, so oil and gas, it's really sensitive, and it goes to like where all the reserves are at. Most of the reserves are in the Middle East. So when something happens in the Middle East, speculators get a hold of that news, and that affects prices. It's also, believe it or not, it's predicated on supply and demand. Now, who controls supply and demand? Well, that's a dance between OPEC and the leaders of the West, right?
Yeah.
But oil and gas contracts and expands, every 5 to 7 years. So, you'll go through a hiring spree, then you go through a downsizing, and I went through 5 of those. That's why I have a lot of passion around change, because during those big change events, I've seen them done very well, where folks leaned on, the pillars of change, which is engagement and transparency.
Yeah.
And some have not done well, right? And some of these events, these selection events, can last for 9 months. So, you got people sitting in their queues for 9 months, not knowing what's going on. What do you think the productivity is? And that's the thing you're after during that's the thing you're after during during a change event is to preserve the operational efficiency, so to speak. Oil and gas is really challenging, and what it boils down to is, we have our 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plans, but it boils down to a 12-month plan or a monthly plan.
Yeah. Right.
When it comes to oil, because the more barrels you put through the pipe, the more profit for the company, because oil and gas, yes, while lucrative, it is expensive as well. Large projects can go into the 50 billion mark, right, and take 4 or 5 years to construct. So there's a lot of expense that goes into that, and exploration, and just running the business. Oil and gas jobs have some of the best benefits, that you can get today.
Well, I only ask, thank you, by the way, for explaining that. That's
Sure.
not what the purpose of this podcast is, but I ask you to describe that because I hope the listeners didn't miss. A big project in your industry is a 5-year project that may cost a company $50 billion, and there's no guarantee that you're going to make that money back. So I watched the industry, post record profits in one quarter. We made $37 billion. And then 6 months later, hey, we just lost $25 billion. And most industries can't survive that kind of volatility.
Right.
And then you described this cycle of ups and downs. They're not entirely predictable. So with that comes all of the challenges of leading, and leading is always a people business, as you and I both know, Bobby. So
100%.
what I want to get into is, how did you end up learning to lead? I really want you to talk about your time in the Marine Corps and maybe even in the Gulf War here. And how did you learn? The bigger question that I want you to camp on for a few minutes is, how did you learn to love to lead? Because when I started leading, I really didn't love it. In fact, I kind of hated it. And then there was a transition that had to happen. So tell me how this went for you, man.
Sure. So, great question. I've always got to give credit to my parents. My father was a World War II, Korea and Vietnam veteran.
Wait a second. He served. He served in all three of those wars: World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. He
That's
was.
impressive.
He was the quintessential greatest generation. Never heard him complain once. Always seen him work hard. Never left a task unfinished. So, having said that, it was a lot to live up to, but at the same time,
I'm sure,
as well as I, when you're immersed in that environment, it rubs off.
Yeah.
Right. And so my mom, her family was from Yugoslavia. We came here with nothing. My grandfather learned to teach, or we learned English. And then, when folks would come over, he'd teach English. They wound up in Wyoming, bought a ranch and stuff. But they're tough people, man. They're tough people. Serbians, really tough. So with my mom, she was an even harder worker than my dad.
Wow.
Right?
Okay. That's impressive. If your mom is outworking your dad.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And she had arms this big, you know what I'm saying? So, we go out to the woods.
Eastern European woman with, hard as, tough as nails, right?
Yeah. My dad was quiet, but she was fiery, you know what I'm saying?
Awesome.
So, we'd go cut wood and, she'd be the one carrying the biggest logs, and, man, there was no quitting. You stayed there all day until it was done.
Sorry, man. I just got this mental image of your mom and dad having a competition to carry the most firewood back to the ranch, and your mom is winning. I love this imagery, and I'm not missing the fact that you came from a pretty amazing gene pool.
Well, no, listen to this, man. My dad worked overseas for Brown and Root right after he retired.
Yeah. Okay.
And we had 2 acres, and we had a push mower. And my mom would push mow 2 acres. Now,
holy cow.
Mind you, this is South Louisiana. This is not Ohio or, Arizona, right? 100 degrees humidity, 100 degrees
humidity, yeah.
100% humidity, 100 degrees out, and as soon as we could stand up, we were helping her, push behind her and stuff like that. So, man, it just rubbed off. Like, if you want to do anything or go anywhere, you had to work. And, I think my mom taught me the most humility, because if you want to go somewhere, she might say, go plant flowers, right? Or go weed the flower bed or vacuum the house or something like that. And there was no questioning or bargaining. It was like, you did it, it's just how it was.
Yeah.
But so that was the beginning, so I was well prepared for the Marine Corps because my mother was meticulous. She was a perfectionist. You never saw dust. You never saw dust anywhere in the house. Vacuum the house twice a day, just a constant, worker. I credit them. And then, playing football, from age 7, they gave me a lot of structure. And that was my first introduction to sort of organized, leadership, right? So there's this one person, and he's the coach, and, he's the leader. And probably between age 7 and 19, played 1 year in college, I probably had 7 or 8 coaches.
Uh-huh.
And so, that also gave me a look into the spectrum of how people lead. I didn't know what leadership was, right, when I was younger, 7, 8, 9, 10, even up to 13, 14, but, you saw these random personalities, and you saw how different personalities, sometimes got the same result.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So, you kind of learn what works and kind of what, doesn't work personality wise. Then in the Marine Corps is probably really where, the light bulb went off. obviously during boot camp, the Marine Corps teaches leadership, and they teach leadership the same way to every rank, right? So, it's not a, there's no big question mark why the Marines are so successful, right? It's meeting the standard, and always, like, not sometimes, but always. And if you're not, your peers are going to let you know, your subordinates are going to let you know, and your superiors are certainly going to let you know. So you got a three-prong attack, of meeting the standards. But after boot camp, General Gray, at the time he was a commandant of the Marine Corps, he started what's called Marine combat training, where for 28 days, every Marine, regardless of MOS, will go to Marine combat training and learn to be a rifleman and a warfighter first before they did anything else. So I don't know why. The sergeant picked me, to lead the squad. And for 28 days, I was a squad leader, and, got called every name in the book and seemed like I couldn't do anything right.
Yep.
And, but yet I kept getting these assignments of increasing responsibility, So all that said and done, I was platoon honor man, for that cycle of Marine combat training. Yeah. And, so that's when the light really went off that, well, hey, I really don't know what I'm doing being a leader, but I did it. Right. And it was kind of the weirdest thing. And, that's actually when I started to love leadership, even though it was hard, it was quirky, you don't know what moves to make. Right. I mean, that was like 1989, 1990, okay. Yeah, there were books, but there was no, internet where you could go get information or, none of the stuff that exists today where you can know anything about everything in like 5 hours. So it was kind of a trial by fire thing. And then getting to the Fleet Marine Corps, where you go to your first duty station, I realized very quickly that I needed to be humble, because I was outranking I was 19, 20, 21, and I was outranking some 27 and 28-year-olds, that had been busted down, and like, they really didn't care. And I actually wrote an article about this. They didn't care that I outranked them. The one thing they cared about was respect, right? Mutual respect. So that's where I learned, more humility, more mutual respect, more of asking, in the right way, So yeah, that's kind of the journey of how everything got started. And then, for the last 34 years, I've not only practiced leadership in the trenches, right? I've always been in the operations and execution side. But I've studied and I've observed leaders every step of the way.
Well, you and I started leading about the same time. I joined the U.S. Army 1987, got promoted to the rank of sergeant about 89, and started leading. I think I was 88 or 89, then I got promoted to the rank of sergeant and started leading. And man, it was a lot harder than I expected. Although I had a little bit of leadership opportunities in school before I joined the Army, leading in the military is no joke, especially leading in the military during a time of combat, which you did. So can you tell a little bit about what you experienced, your role in the Gulf War back in Kuwait and Iraq, 1991?
Yeah. So we were in 29 Palms. Actually, no, this was in Okinawa before I was in 29 Palms. I was in Okinawa.
Yeah.
And we were doing some training there. And, this guy comes out, kind of draped in a dress and, headgear and stuff. And like, yeah, something's brewing. And like, we didn't really, couldn't figure out what was going on. And then when I got to 29 Palms, we started seeing things on the news. So we were part of First Force Service Support Group, first FSSG. And within a Force Service Support Group, you have 3 CSSDs, Combat Service Support Detachments. So we're one of 3 CSSDs that went over to Saudi. So we landed in Jubail, and we stayed there for probably 3 or 4 days. One night, you know how big GP tents are, right? So
yes, of course.
we
everybody
had a whole
listening, those big green circus tents where you just throw everything and everybody underneath it, and it gets really messy underneath those tents pretty quick.
Yeah, and there was such an influx of people. Yeah, there was not enough room for everyone to be comfortable, right? So we had a whole platoon split between two GP tents.
Right.
So that's pretty tight with gear and everything you brought over there, your whole kit. So all they told us before we left, we didn't have any workup training or anything like that, was, it's probably a good chance, there's going to be some nerve gas or mustard gas, stuff like that.
Threat of chemical or biological attack. Yes.
The one thing we did do is drill with our mop gear, right? That's the military protective gear for chemicals, if people don't know. And it's real bulky, and you start sweating real fast. It's charcoaly, like on the inside,
especially in the 130-degree heat of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. So we went to bed. Hit the rack one night, and in the middle of the night, a Patriot missile goes off, right? And you got to understand, like, it knocked out all the electricity. So we're in the dark, and there are people shouting commands, mop level 4, right? And that mop level 4 means, hey, put everything on.
Gloves, boots, pants, everything. I remember it all.
Exactly. Yep. And so, imagine, 15 people inside of a GP tent trying to do all that concurrently. So when the light came on, this was after about 4 or 5 minutes, 0 people had on all their gear.
I was going to say, I got this mental image right now of people. Yeah. It's just a mess with people having all kinds of stuff backwards and upside down, right?
Total cluster. Cluster. We would all been, cooked for sure.
Right.
But that was my first introduction to an unexpected loud boom. If you've ever heard a Patriot missile go off, man, it's loud.
It explodes out of the tube and then takes off.
It's loud as hell. So after the shock of that, we went forward. Our platoon, our company rather, was tasked with constructing an EPW camp. All right. And for those who don't know what EPW means, it means enemy prisoner of war. Right. So we went forward. We're in between Kabrit and the Kuwaiti border. And I don't know exactly where we were because there's nothing there. It's just sand. So we land there at night, obviously, like Marines do. Everything's nocturnal. Next day, we get up and break out our kit and start mapping out this compound. And a lot of our gear didn't make it. You know what triple stranded concertina is, right?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So I was a combat engineer. So as a combat engineer, that's an essential part of our role is to string that type of wire and build tetrahedrons and all kind of stuff like that, explosives. But our gauntlets didn't make it, right? And gauntlets are a leather glove that it appears to have staples in it. So when you're handling wire, right, you don't poke yourself. Well, we built that camp with patrol gloves, right? So
and cut yourself to pieces, shredded your hands to pieces, putting that wire up.
Yeah, it's like razor blades,
Yep.
But we got it done, and so once the frame of it was up, they asked us to build shells for GP tents. Well, our hammers didn't make it either, so we had to use ball peen hammers.
Oh my goodness! Man.
Ball peen hammers don't have a claw. And so the nails we received were from Poland, and not to diss Poland, but whenever you hit one of these nails, if you didn't hit it perfect, it did like that.
Right? Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we got the camp built, and we eventually got some help from the CB.
50 million nails later, you got the camp built. Yeah.
Yes. Talk about suffering, but everyone was in it together, and if you know anything about Marines are always complaining, right? But here's the thing.
Sure.
Are always working as well.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say, you get scared when they stop complaining. That's when it starts to get really scary.
Exactly. So, got the whole thing built, got help from the CBs, got a couple.
By the way, toughest or the hardest working people in the entire U.S. military, the U.S. Navy Seabees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love those guys to death.
They came in, built the chow hall. Unfortunately, the chow hall wasn't for us; it was for the prisoners. We had to eat MREs while they were eating hot rice and
classic. Yeah.
Now we had a few midnight acquisitions, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
But we got the camp built, and at its height, I think we had about 8,000 prisoners come through. We started making runs to the front, to receive the prisoners because once everything started, it was kind of anticlimactic. There were a lot of surrendering. Folks have been in these bunkers for 30 days with no food and, all kinds of stuff like that. So, we had to deal with a lot of folks that are very disheveled and, just not very well, and most of them, weren't even trained fighters.
Oh, yeah.
There was one guy we had on our bus. He was from Chicago. He was on vacation and he got conscripted. Yeah, true story. He was back there singing Ebony and Ivory. It's like, well, where do you know that from? It's like, man, I'm from Chicago, It's like,
but I went over there myself. I remember people surrendering by the tens of thousands. I think when it was over with, 150,000 people had surrendered because of the merciless bombing. And also because most of them, I didn't sign up for this fight. I was forced out here. So the idea of running a camp in the middle of a patch of desert in nowhere sounds absolutely, challenging to say the least. At this
We're
point.
totally unprotected. Yeah. We had 50 cows. We had 50 cow stations on each corner, but we couldn't set them up, per Geneva or what have you. We had an armory full of stuff, and there's another story here too. Is one afternoon, we saw a smoke cloud, and then we saw two more smoke clouds. And they were coming towards us in a linear, fashion. And it was far off, right?
In other words, this is not natural. This is man-made coming at me.
Exactly. And so, the decision was made to sort of, bug out and leave the facility. So in our officers' infinite wisdom, they put all the weapons in the armory and burned them, with incendiary grenades and all that stuff. And we, took off on buses and, whatever. But, that was pretty much it. We constructed the EPW camp, with that one little incident. And, there were thousands and thousands of prisoners that came through, and they would come to our facility for a few days. We'd go get them with buses, come to our facility. And then after a few days, after they'd been through an intelligence, not interrogation. I mean, there was a small tent there. I didn't think they were doing interrogation. They were doing more screenings. We would take them to another place. So, and then, that wound up, fairly quick. And, we were there 90 days and then we were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anybody who knows the U.S. Marine Corps knows that you guys have great equipment, you have technology, you have a great mission, but the Marine Corps doesn't focus on any of those things. And I think rightly so. The Marine Corps is all about training Marines to be leaders. One of the things that distinguishes the Marine Corps from the rest of the services is how every Marine is trained to be a combat leader. I've always looked at the Marine platoon leader course and thought that is something that every branch of the military should take and learn from. So obviously you were exposed to leadership in the home, you're exposed to leadership in sports, you're exposed to leadership in the military. When did you decide to separate from the Marine Corps and step into the civilian world?
Yeah, no, great question. And it's one I've struggled with for a long time. When I was about to re-enlist, President Clinton was elected, right? I don't know if you remember that. And he decided to downsize.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was
downsized the U.S. military, like by about 40%, if I remember the numbers correct.
It was a big deal. And I remember at that time, me, I was concerned about myself, but I was only 23 at the time. But there were some people who had been in 12, 14 years in combat roles, so what do? And they wanted to be lifers, right? So to get to my point, I could only re-enlist in avionics, which is electronics on airplanes, or O2 intelligence, and definitely didn't want to be in avionics. I wanted to be to fight. Even though those folks support the fight, I want to be in the action. I actually wanted to be a sniper going into the Marine Corps. That's another story as well. So didn't want to be in avionics, and was probably not mature enough to know what intelligence was, really. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and separate it this time. But no, I wanted to be a sniper, and coming out of boot camp, my MOS was 0311. That's a grunt. But during Marine combat training, they changed it from 0311 to 1371 to combat engineer. So I didn't have the opportunity to be a grunt or try out for recon or anything like that. But
and back in those days, as it is today, Marine snipers are some of the most talented snipers on the planet. Because of that sniper course that you guys run.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk us through just briefly transitioning out of the military. I hope for you it was easier. For me, I thought it was going to be simple, but it actually was much more of a challenge than I expected. You transition out of the military and into this, into business. What was that transition like for you? And did you have your mind set on the petroleum industry, or did you just kind of follow, the path that was opened up in front of you?
Yeah, no, great questions. Believe it or not, even after 4 years, transitioning was a struggle because I grasped on tight to process and procedure and standards, right?
Funny how the military will do that to you. Yeah.
Especially performance standards, right? Like even appearance, right? When you first get out, it's hard for you to look at, civilians and, eventually yourself, because you've just done it a certain way for so long, it just becomes part of who you are. So I struggle with isolation a little bit. I found that I didn't have a lot in common with most civilians, rightly. I was a combat engineer.
Know exactly what you're saying. Yep.
There's a lack of structure. In the military, you're part of a machine. You occupy a space in a larger machine. In a civilian world, yes, but a lot of those lines are blurred, right? So, there's also stigma and stereotypes and, trying to find your identity, because, like yesterday, I was a combat engineer, today I'm a civilian, and there's not a real big market for explosive experts, right?
Yeah.
There was one company in Vegas and one in New York.
Yeah.
And
there's some guys that are blowing up the side of a hill to build a road, but beyond that, there's not a big market or not a big demand for that.
Yeah. So, after I got, past, those few struggles, I said, okay, I'm from South Louisiana. That's where I went back to. And there's a lot of opportunity there in the oil field. And my cousin was a commercial diver. So when I was in the Philippines, I went on a 6-month assignment in the Philippines when we were in Okinawa. Well, I learned to scuba dive there. And
were you at Subic Bay?
Yeah, that's where I went to jungle environment survival training.
Man,
yeah.
Check this out. How about that? Way to go.
I spent 6 months there.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother story for us to talk about.
Sure.
But yeah. And so I went to commercial diving school, used my GI Bill and did commercial diving for about a year and, figured out that I was okay with isolation on land, but when you're offshore for 60 days at a time, living with 8 other people in a berth, I said, this is not going to be my gig. It's not going to be my gig, so I cut bait there. And while I was going to diving school, I took this elective named non-destructive examination. And so that's where you learn how to use different electronics and techniques to test oil field equipment like piping and pressure vessels and large tanks. You see these refineries, it's about inspecting all that type of equipment. So I made a lateral move over to that. Did that for 4 to 5 years, worked around the country during outages, refinery outages, and started my own business in 2000 and had that until about 2004, worked overseas in a joint venture. And then after that, I hired in with Chevron and, spent a couple of decades almost with them.
Yeah. When did you start leading at Chevron? Like, what did that look like for you?
Right away. I was 35 when I joined Chevron, and I had more leadership, than most of the people that have been with the company, 25 or 30 years, from a training and practice perspective, right, in different, venues. So right away. And my first assignment in leadership was, it was people leadership, but it was more technology innovation leadership, right? I brought some technology to Chevron. It's named phased array that wasn't in the company before. And I worked for 8 years on one specific application and was able to bring that to fruition because I was obsessed with it. I knew it would work. And, a lot of people said it wouldn't. And, we fought that every step of the way, but eventually, after 8 years, we perfected it and, saved the company, millions and millions of dollars on projects.
In true Marine fashion, you never gave up on it. Too bad they didn't give you a little kickback on all of the, the savings that they made on your hard work.
Yeah. Well, I was just happy to bring something new to the company and contribute to the overall mission. Right. And, and that's the thing, everyone's got to have a mission. I feel that everyone's got to be working towards some big thing, right? Something bigger than themselves. And if you believe in it, if you truly can see it and believe it's going to work, don't give up.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Keep moving. Because a lot of times, no is the avenue to yes. And you have to understand clients, and it goes back to that technology curve where you got your early innovators on one side and you got your laggards on the other side. You're really competing for this small slice in the middle of people that you can bring over to, the earlier side of adoption, right? You don't want to mess around with the laggards or the late adopters because they're there for a reason.
You're not going to be able to convince them anyway. Right.
Exactly. So I teach people how to meander through that as well, technology wise, in the technology leadership.
I was going to say, we're going to talk in just a second about the way that you're leading leaders. We're going to talk about lead you in just a moment. Mm-hmm. But I want people to hear from you, man. You start off at the ground level at the company. And then after lots of hard work and not giving up, you end up leading a pretty big team, more than 100 people. You got a huge budget, and no one guy can lead all of those people by themselves. So I am already here, and you're figuring out how to lead other leaders. That is a transition that some people just don't do very well. Can you describe the transition of going from leading people to leading leaders of people, and what that was like for you at Chevron?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about, believe it or not, in a large company like Chevron, you don't pick your team. Right. And that could be true for a lot of organizations.
I was going to say, there's a lot of people listening right now that are like, oh, thank God, I thought it was just my company that doesn't let me pick my team. But apparently other companies don't either.
Yeah. But, the point of it and the point of working with a span of control and the point of contributing through others is doing your absolute best with what you have to work with. Right. And that's not just your span of control, that's with what you have in yourself as well. But it's understanding each and every person in your span of control. Like my last assignment has a span of control of 5, right? And I knew those people intimately inside and out. I knew what buttons I could push. I knew what buttons not to push. I knew when to be flexible. I knew when to be rigid. But always I kind of worked with these 3 maxims in mind. And I know that kind of sounds a little wordy or buzzwordy, but I figured if I treated people how they wanted to be treated, and I would grow and develop people, and I would deliver the plan. Those three things would make me successful in anything I did. And knock on wood, it's true. If you treat people the right way and you grow and develop people, even your span of control, because people in your span of control are looking for the next your next assignment, right, of increasing responsibility. They're just as ambitious as a subject matter
wants
expert.
to move up. Yeah,
absolutely. So you have to know about that and pay attention to that. And then, we're all in the military. There's a mission. In the corporate world, there's a business plan. All right, it's a business plan every year. Everybody knows what it is. Everyone knows their role in that business plan. And that's another prime thing is, people need to know what their role is, not only in the organization, but in this year's plan, right? So they need to feel important. They need to feel like their contributions are immediately impacting the overall mission. And that's the responsibility of a leader to articulate the why to people. This sort of gets into strategy, tactics, and operationalizing things, right? Strategy is always the what, tactics is always the how, and operationalization is marrying strategy and tactics, right? And when you teach people to do that, they can see the big picture. But one of the things I try to focus on was teaching people how to lead through change. And leading through change is not just the big change event, like a downsizing or a restructuring of the organization. Change is sort of omnipresent, right? With people, there's micro change within a person. They might have lost a loved one. They might have got divorced. That they have a new assignment. That's a change. Maybe there were subject matter, and you'll see this happen a lot in the corporate world. A person is a subject matter expert and they do something really, really well. And all of a sudden, leadership wants to make that person a people leader. And they've had zero people leadership experience.
Those two things don't always translate. Yep.
No, they don't. And, I was always careful to help people that sort of came from being an SME right into a people leader, right? Because it's a lot of, it's a heavy weight.
That's a hard jump to make right there. Yep.
It's a hard jump from individual to leading other people. Because as an individual, yes, you are working as a member within a team for the greater good, but we all have wanted to develop ourselves for more enrichment, more opportunity, and guess what? Anyone who picks up a gun, just military wise, they're ambitious. Right? They're running towards the fight, right? It's the same thing, in the corporate world. There's a lot of ambitious people, and you have to learn how to manage that, right?
Yeah, to point that ambition in the right direction, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You said something a couple of minutes ago. It did not pass my attention. You said you wanted to become an expert on the people that you lead. Now I want to point something out for the listeners, and then I'd like for you to elaborate. There are great leaders that understand processes and they understand equipment and technical stuff, and they've mastered it, and they're really good because they've mastered the technical side of stuff. But it's really, really hard to master people. And the greatest leaders, every single one of them, it doesn't matter what the industry, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter, what your goal is. Every great leader that I've ever read about, ever met personally, they all share the same trait, what you just described. They have figured out how to master people, the people that they work with, the people that work for them. But that's not easy because, as you said just a moment ago, people change. They're actually in a constant state of change. And what made the people that work with you do something today may not work at all tomorrow because they've changed, the circumstances have changed, life has changed. So you obviously knew your stuff and you really learned how to learn people well. Can you talk to that aspiring leader, the guy or the gal that's making the jump from just doing their job to now starting to lead people do their job? they don't know what it takes to master people. They don't know what it means to become an expert on the people that they're about to lead. Can you give them a couple of pieces of advice real quick?
Oh, absolutely. First thing I would say is no one cares about your authority. If you're using authority,
I'm laughing out loud because it's 100% true. No one gives a flying rip what your title is.
man, no one cares. And once I realized that, once I was humbled, to that fact many, many years ago, that's when I decided to be a servant, to people. So the next thing I would say is, so what does it take to know people and to get people to do things in the right way that contribute towards the mission? Well, the answer is influence, right? And people think influence is, such a mystery. It's not. It's really quite simple, but it takes a whole lot of investment. The avenue to influence is understanding, right? So in Nigeria, we have 13 different nationalities. Now, do you think for one moment I could interact with all 13 of these nationalities from a Western point of view? No. I have to sit with these people. I have to have lunch with them. I have to drink a beer with them. I have to be with them in many different settings to really know who they are and what makes them tick. I have to be aware of their cultural norms, right? I have to be aware of what I can and I can't say. I can't just say anything just because I'm a leader. Now, that team, we were so close that, we said a lot of things. It was kind of like being in the military. I mean, we had camaraderie, we really did. And that was one of the harder parts of, leaving that assignment. But I would say that, like no one cares about your authority. Don't try to lead through fear. Don't try to always position yourself above, listen to understand, not to respond. Try to understand people is what I would say.
And for the listener right now, it doesn't matter if you work in business. It doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom right now, whatever walk of life you're in, what you're hearing from him is absolutely gold. Fear will never accomplish what trust and influence will accomplish. Knowing people and knowing what makes them tick will always get a whole lot more done than actually offering them a bonus, a pay raise, or threatening, their job. So obviously you've learned a few things along the way, Bobby.
100%, man.
A few things.
And look, I haven't always been perfect either. I've
you
failed
and me both. Yeah.
I failed so many times along the way, but I was always able to recover. Nothing was egregious. And, when I was 45 and it's kind of, I guess we'll get into the book later, I had that big success, but, big success often masks cracks, right? And things that are not going so well. And that's, in my life, I've always had a horror of failure. Like failure was horrible for me, just because of trying to live up to expectations of my parents, and not necessarily because they said, "Hey, Bobby, be perfect," but like I said, it was a tall task just to keep up.
Yeah,
man,
of course.
So, but when I was 45, I learned that there's a constructive side to failure and a destructive side.
And if I was going to say, people are on the edge of their seat right now. So you got to tell them what's the difference, because there's a lot of positive that can come out of failure, or it can ruin you, one or the other.
Failure is number one, it's a signal to rearm. It's feedback, but it's opportunity to learn where you need to get better. Yeah. Right. Failure is an opportunity to learn. Right. Now, there's another side of failure, the destructive side, where, woe is me, and, it wasn't my fault, and, you don't learn anything from it, so you duplicate, right? If failure, one small failure now can help you eliminate a big failure later.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think some call it, there's a lot of verbiage and wordy stuff out there. Some say it's, failing forward or something like that, but I just think there's a lot to learn from failure. And again, as long as it's not egregious, you can recover.
Yeah.
You can recover.
Sure. The history books are littered with examples of guys and gals that have failed again and again and again, But like you said, they learned from it, they grew from it, and then the pieces finally started to fall into place. And all of a sudden, they became some of the greatest leaders in history. Thinking of Abraham Lincoln right now, whose life was nothing but one repetitive failure after another. And then all of the pieces fell together, and goodness, what an incredible leader, because he learned and he grew from it instead of just being defeated by it and given up as a result of failure.
Well, here's something too, in doing my research to come on this podcast, I listened to number one, and that's where
Bobby, way to go.
That's where you articulated, why this Unbeatable podcast.
Yeah.
And, you brought out the quintessential quote about the man in the arena. And that quote's actually in my book. But people have to realize that, they are the ones inside the arena with a dusty face and the scars, and they're the ones doing it. So don't be so hard on yourself either, right? I'm my own worst critic. I'm hard on myself. Again, when I was 45 and I kind of had that, burnout, rock bottom, type thing, I learned to let go of a few things. I had to, right? And that was one of the things, is not being so hard on myself. There's no point in it.
Yeah.
There's no gain. It's like worry, right?
Right.
How many times has worry ever made something better?
Yeah. Right.
Well, it hasn't, right? So, why be hard on yourself like that? If you put hand over your heart and say, with the tools and knowledge I had, I did my best, but I still fell short, that's something to actually be proud of. You just take the learnings and, you move forward. Now, if you didn't do your studying, or, you kind of gave a half-hearted effort and you failed, well, then that's on you.
Yeah.
Right. And I've had both of those, failures.
I was going to say, that's the distinction right there. Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So you learned a few things along the way. You put what you learned together, and you started Rubicon Course of Action. Can you tell everybody what Rubicon is? What did you set out to accomplish when you started it?
Sure. Yeah. So, again, leadership is not taught in so many institutions, right? Even in the large company I was in, we had some.
Unfortunately, it should be taught at every institution at every level, but you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, in many places, it's not taught at all.
So, long story short, there's a crisis of leadership. There's a crisis of teaching folks how to lead. There's a crisis of introducing people to what leadership is, leadership framework, right? And I'm not saying everyone should follow the way I do it, but I'm giving people tools to consider, right? And I'm trying to positively impact people who want to be leaders of themselves. They want to be technical leaders. You want to be a people leader. That's the gap that we solve with Rubicon. Rubicon has two dimensions. One is live events. They're on demand. We do a 2-day, a 4-day, and we offer a 6-day retreat, for companies who want to do that.
All right. Yeah.
And, the retreats it's 100% giving you tools that you can use when you walk away, right? Like we're not doing trust falls and stuff like that. And if folks want to do that, that's fine. But I'm telling you, we want to do things that are going to give you tools to use the day you walk away. Simple, effective tools. Second part of that, of Rubicon, is we have a coaching program. It's named Stronger You. It's focused primarily on business owners, founders, and executives. If you're pursuing something that's really big, at some point you need help. And people always ask, okay, you're doing this executive coaching, what's your unique selling point, or how are you different? Well, for 34 years, I've been in the trenches on the execution and operations side, and I've had a lot of failures, a lot of successes, and I've lived through everything people are experiencing. So, when people hire me, they're buying my 34 years of experience, right? I don't give advice. I give experience.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. And I want to mention, who wouldn't pay for somebody else's experience, especially to learn from some of the mistakes somebody else made, so you don't have to make the same mistakes yourself. Of course, you and I are going to still make mistakes, but why wouldn't you learn from somebody else's mistakes instead of repeating them yourself?
Exactly. It's offering people an ability to compress, the 34 years of my experience into their life or their operation, whatever they choose. And that leads to,
go ahead.
That leads to, sort of why I wrote the book.
Sure.
I
love the idea of people getting 34 years of your experience in a 2-day, 4-day, 6-day retreat, but ultimately you need to take something home with you. So Bobby, you're helping people figure out how to lead you. This is my segue, just setting you up now to go ahead and talk about the book right now.
Yeah. We all want to lead others. We all want to lead organizations. Some people want to lead the world. But before you do all that, there's one thing you need to do first. And you need to do it with relative excellence, and that's leading yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
Totally
agree.
Man, it's very important. Again, the whole Rubicon COA company, it's about getting to the root cause of things, nothing, there's something I call symptom leadership. Right. Versus let's get to the core of what's going on here. Right. And the core of leading ourselves is, our first starts with our character. Right. Then it goes on to values. Right. How many, there's a study done a few years back, and, I can name it. I can put it in the chat if you want to let the readers, or the listeners see it later. But in that study, it revealed across industry that only 10% of leaders are willing to live the company's values, much less their own.
Wow.
Right. So
that 90% are just going to go do their own thing and give lip service to it, but do their own thing.
Yeah. So, we do this little exercise in our workshops, and we give people a pen and a sticky and say, okay, write down your 5, core values. And after about 10 seconds, say, okay, hands, pens down. Who's got 5? By show of hands, who's got 5? Who's got 4, 3? Most people have 1 or 2, if that. So you mean to tell me you're living a life of purpose, but you don't know what your core values are?
Yeah.
Right. So how is that differentiating you from person X? Right. How would you sail the ocean without a compass and a map?
Right.
Of course you wouldn't. So, it's very important that people get grounded in what character looks like, character traits and values and so on and so forth. And then, after that, we go on to talk about self-trust, which is the precursor to self-belief, which I believe is a precursor to, lasting discipline. You have to have those two things before you really know what, discipline is. I love chapter 10. It's on perfection. I give people permission not to be perfect because nothing is perfect. I make a lot of sports analogies in the book because I love sports. I really thought I would be an NFL linebacker. It was my first, football was my first love, but, you look at, hitters, if someone's hitting 300 is excellent. So why do you think as an individual, you're going to make 10 out of 10 goals?
Yeah. Right.
It's not about giving people permission not to try, but it's asking them to be excellent versus being perfect. I find when people chase perfection, it can almost become destructive, right? Versus pursuing excellence. And I say that with confidence because I'm a recovering perfectionist, just because of my upbringing.
Okay.
And all that.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Sure. People are listening to you right now. They're very interested. When the book dropped in March of this year, but where can they get it if they want to buy a copy? Is it both digital and in print?
Yeah, both. We actually did an audiobook as well.
All right.
And the gentleman who read the book, his name's Shimon Casey. We did interviews between each chapter. So you get a little bit more context.
Little extra if you do the audiobook. All right.
Yeah, it's like a little mini podcast in between each chapter. So I thought that was neat. So they can find it on Amazon. or Barnes and Noble. It's on all the major distributors.
I'm going to put a link to your book and in the notes to this episode, just so people can find it. But Bobby, I don't let a guest on the show or a family member on the show that is served or married to somebody, in the family of somebody who's served without saying personally, thank you, man, for what you've done for our country and the cause of freedom. But also thank you for helping to build the next generation of leaders. As you said, your dad came from the greatest generation. And, the only thing preventing the next generation from causing us to go off a cliff and fall into an abyss is somebody handing down great leadership traits to the next generation. So thank you for doing that, man.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. For me, service was important. Like I said, I thought I was going to be an NFL linebacker, and that didn't work out. But I always knew I would serve, whether it was public service or the military. And then my dad was in those 3 wars, and I said, well, I don't really know a lot about public service, but I know a lot from him. Yeah. So let me try my hand at the military. And man, I'm glad I did. It was the best 4 years of my life. There are a lot of trials and tribulations, in those short 4 years.
Yeah.
But, it set the mood and tone, laid the groundwork for the rest of my life. And, I wouldn't be where I am today, without that background.
And I would say the exact same thing of my time in the military too, man.
Yeah,
obviously you've served, you continue to serve, and you serve people now by helping them to, develop character and become the leader that can lead themselves. And that's always going to be your greatest leadership challenge. So thank you for being on this episode with me, Bobby.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it, buddy.
Hey, Bobby just said something. I hope that it impacted you while you were driving like it impacted me. I wrote this down right after he said it. If you really, really believe in it, then don't give up. And if you believe in it that much and you don't give up, chances are things are actually going to work out in the long run. It just may be a lot of hard knocks along the way. While Bobby was making that statement, it couldn't help but think, and if you don't believe in it, don't really, really believe in it, then why are you giving so much energy to it in the first place? I hope that you took that little nugget home or something else from my conversation with Bobby Harrington today. Hey, as always, thank you for checking out this podcast. If you just stumbled across us and you're hearing this for the first time, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? Go ahead and hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or you can subscribe to the video on YouTube, and we'll drop another episode next week. But I also want to tell you, follow us on social media. If you just search for @Unbeatable Podcast, you will find us on pretty much every social media platform out there. And we deliver regular content during the week. You'll also find some pretty amazing people. I always like to highlight some of the great people that are highly connected with us on social media. And the person that I want to highlight this week, our fan of the week this week, is Jim Nicholas. Jim, thank you for being really engaged. Thank you for being really connected. If you want to get Bobby's book, we're going to give away a free copy of it. And all you got to do is to just join the Unbeatable Army, which is totally free. It's our email list where we send you content throughout the week. If you want to be registered for Bobby's book, if you want to get content for us, just go over to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for checking out this episode. I'll see you right back here next week. Godspeed.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.